As per reported by various news outlets, it will be the final season of Yellowstone.
To tens of millions of fans worldwide, he is Jimmy Hurdstrom, the battered, bruised, but beloved underdog who rode his way from a branded criminal to a certified Texas cowboy on the biggest television show on the planet. But while viewers assumed starring on Yellowstone meant private jets, massive paychecks, and effortless Hollywood royalty, the truth behind Jefferson White's bank account told a terrifyingly different story. Behind the cinematic dust and prestige television glamour was an actor quietly watching his life savings evaporate into single digits, wondering if he could even afford his next meal. How did one of modern TV's most recognizable breakout stars end up staring down total financial ruin while starring in a multi-billion-dollar empire? Let's get one thing straight right from the top. When you watch Yellowstone, and I mean really watch it, the sweeping drone shots of Montana, the brooding stares, the $200 million production budgets, the Kevin Costner star power, your brain does something very specific. It tells you that everyone on that screen is filthy rich. It tells you that landing a recurring role on the #1 drama on cable television is the equivalent of winning the lottery. And honestly, that assumption makes total sense. We see the horses, the helicopters, the sprawling ranch sets, the wardrobe that costs more than most people's cars, and we just assume the money is flowing to everyone involved. But here is the brutal, uncomfortable truth that Hollywood never wants you to know. Being on a hit show and being wealthy are two completely different realities, and the gap between them is far wider than most fans could ever imagine. Jefferson White did not grow up with a silver spoon, a trust fund, or a single industry connection. He was born in Mount Vernon, Iowa, a small, quiet, cornfield-surrounded town that is about as far from the Hollywood Hills as you can physically get without leaving the continental United States. Growing up in the Midwest, White was a theater kid, the kind of guy who found his voice on small community stages and dreamed about something bigger without ever truly believing it was possible. There were no acting dynasties in his family, no famous relatives pulling strings, no wealthy benefactors writing checks to smooth the road. When he made the decision to pursue acting professionally, he did it the old-fashioned, terrifying way. He packed up everything he owned, left behind the safety and comfort of the only world he had ever known, and threw himself headfirst into the most competitive, most unforgiving industry on the planet with absolutely nothing in his back pocket to fall back on. And here is where the story gets genuinely painful. Because when you move to New York City or Los Angeles as a young, unknown actor, the math works against you from day one. Rent alone devours your bank account before you even book a single audition. Then you add the cost of headshots, acting classes, agent commissions, manager fees, union dues, transportation to callbacks, and the simple fact that you need to eat every single day even when you are not working. Jefferson White was grinding through this exact nightmare for years, scraping by on tiny guest spots and off-Broadway gigs that paid just enough to keep him technically alive but nowhere near comfortable. He was living that invisible actor lifestyle that millions of people in Los Angeles know intimately but almost nobody outside the industry ever sees or talks about. Then came the moment that was supposed to change everything. The audition for Yellowstone. The role of Jimmy Hurdstrom, the scrappy, orphaned ranch hand who gets branded and fights his way into the Yellowstone fold. White booked the part, and from the outside, it looked like his ship had finally come in. Fans started recognizing him. His social media following exploded. He was suddenly part of the biggest cultural phenomenon in television. But behind the scenes, something was going catastrophically wrong. A devastating combination of delayed payments, unexpected tax liabilities from working across multiple states, and a series of personal financial emergencies hit Jefferson White all at once, draining his accounts faster than any paycheck could refill them. He was starring on the most-watched show in America, and yet he was quietly, desperately running out of money. So how exactly did a guy on the biggest show on television end up staring at a bank balance that looked like a rounding error? The answer is buried in the darkest, most overlooked chapter of his journey, and it starts with a series of decisions he made long before the cameras ever started rolling. To truly understand how Jefferson White ended up in such a precarious financial position, you have to rewind the clock well before Yellowstone ever entered the picture. Because the truth is, the money problems did not start when he landed the role of Jimmy Hurdstrom. They started years earlier, during the grinding, soul-crushing stretch of his career that most fans never see and that the entertainment industry actively tries to erase from the public narrative. Before the Montana ranches and the cowboy hats, Jefferson White was a working actor in the most literal, least glamorous sense of that phrase. He landed a guest spot on FX's critically acclaimed spy thriller The Americans, which sounds incredible on a resume but in reality paid a fraction of what most people assume television work commands. He appeared on Blindspot, NBC's high-octane mystery drama, which again looks phenomenal on paper but translated to a single-episode fee that vanished almost instantly into the black hole of New York City rent, agent commissions, and the basic cost of surviving in one of the most expensive cities on Earth. He did indie films, short films, theater productions, and the occasional commercial, stringing together a patchwork quilt of income that was just barely thick enough to keep him from falling through the cracks entirely. And that is the part of the actor's life that Hollywood's glossy PR machine never shows you, the gaps. The terrifying, suffocating gaps between jobs. Because acting is not a 9-to-5 profession with a steady bi-weekly paycheck and employer-matched retirement contributions. It is a freelance existence where you might work intensely for 3 weeks on a project and then sit completely unemployed for 4 or 5, sometimes 6 months while you wait for the phone to ring. During those dry stretches, the bills do not pause. Your landlord does not care that you are between seasons. The IRS does not offer you a grace period because your last gig wrapped in February and it is now August. Jefferson White lived through these brutal valleys repeatedly, watching his savings shrink to almost nothing while maintaining the outward appearance of a working professional who had everything under control. The desperation got real. We are talking about an actor who reportedly took on side gigs that had absolutely nothing to do with performing just to cover basic living expenses. Bartending, waiting tables, freelance odd jobs, whatever it took to keep the lights on and the phone charged so he would not miss a callback. There were moments, according to people close to him during that period, when White seriously questioned whether he could continue pursuing acting at all. The dream was alive, but the bank account was on life support, and the emotional toll of that contradiction was wearing him down in ways that no amount of positive thinking could fix. Then, out of nowhere, the phone rang. And it was not just any casting director on the other end of the line. It was a call connected to Taylor Sheridan, the visionary creator behind Sicario, Hell or High Water, and the upcoming Paramount juggernaut that would become Yellowstone. The opportunity was massive, career-defining, the kind of break that actors spend their entire lives chasing. But there was a catch that made Jefferson's stomach drop. The timeline was impossibly tight, the logistics were overwhelming, and the upfront costs of relocating, preparing, and committing to an uncertain number of episodes in a remote filming location would require money he simply did not have. He was being handed the golden ticket, but he could not afford the price of admission. And yet, he said yes anyway. He found a way to make it work, borrowing against a future he was not even sure existed, gambling everything on a character named Jimmy Hurdstrom and a show that had not yet proven it would become a cultural juggernaut. But the moment he arrived on set and realized the full scope of what the production was about to demand from him physically, mentally, and financially, Jefferson White understood that the hardest part of his journey was not the years of poverty he had already survived. It was the brutal, punishing trial by fire that was about to begin the very next morning at dawn. Here is the detail that almost nobody talks about, and it is the one that makes Jefferson White's entire Yellowstone journey feel less like a fairy tale and more like an extreme survival documentary. When he showed up for the role of Jimmy Hurdstrom, he flat out lied about his horse riding abilities. He told the casting team and the production crew that he was comfortable on a horse, that he had experience, that he could handle himself in the saddle. In reality, Jefferson White had virtually zero equestrian background. He was a kid from Iowa who had grown up around cornfields and community theater, not sprawling cattle ranches and 1,000-pound quarter horses. And the moment the cameras started rolling in the unforgiving wilderness of Montana, that lie nearly destroyed him. Yellowstone is not the kind of production that uses CGI horses and green screen ranches. Taylor Sheridan demanded authenticity at a level that most modern television shows simply do not attempt. When the script called for Jimmy to ride, wrangle, rope, and work cattle, the actors were expected to actually do those things. No doubles for the wide shots. No cutting away to hide the fact that the performer cannot stay in the saddle. Jefferson was thrown into an intensive cowboy boot camp that was designed to transform city-dwelling actors into convincing ranch hands in a matter of weeks, and the physical toll was absolutely staggering. He was thrown from horses repeatedly. He suffered bruises, muscle tears, and joint injuries that would have sent most people straight to the emergency room. The Montana terrain was brutal, freezing mornings, blistering afternoons, unpredictable weather that could shift from sunshine to sleet in the span of a single scene. Every single day on that set was a physical gauntlet, and Jefferson was absorbing punishment that his body was simply not conditioned to handle. But here is where the story takes a turn that most fans completely missed. Because while his body was being battered on camera, producing some of the most visceral and emotionally raw performances of his career, a completely different kind of damage was happening off camera. The financial trap that had been quietly tightening around him since before he even booked the role was now squeezing harder than ever. Relocating to Montana for extended shooting periods meant paying for temporary housing while still technically maintaining a residence in Los Angeles. The production schedule was erratic, with long stretches of waiting between filming blocks where he was contractually obligated to remain on location but was not earning his full episodic rate. Medical expenses from the onset injuries were piling up faster than his insurance could process them. And because he was still technically a supporting player in the early seasons, not yet a household name commanding renegotiation leverage, his per-episode salary was shockingly modest relative to the physical destruction he was enduring every single day. Think about the cruel irony of that situation for a second. Jefferson White was out there getting bucked off horses, cracking ribs, and pushing his body to the absolute breaking point to deliver authentic, unforgettable television. The scenes he filmed during those early boot camp weeks became some of the most iconic moments in Yellowstone history. Fans were falling in love with Jimmy Hurdstrom, cheering for the underdog, buying the merchandise, quoting the lines. And yet the actor bringing that character to life was quietly hemorrhaging money behind the scenes, watching his already fragile financial foundation crumble under the weight of expenses that nobody in the audience ever considered. The physical pain was temporary. The bruises healed. The bones mended. But the financial damage was compounding silently, building toward a breaking point that Jefferson could feel approaching like a storm on the Montana horizon. And just when he thought the worst was behind him, the production dropped a bombshell that would fundamentally alter his entire relationship with the show, his character, and the paycheck he had sacrificed his body to earn. Let's talk about the number that nobody in Hollywood wants to say out loud, because once you hear it, the entire illusion of television stardom starts to crack like dry Montana earth. When you watch an episode of Yellowstone and see Jefferson White delivering an emotionally devastating performance as Jimmy Hurdstrom, your brain automatically assumes he is pulling down Kevin Costner money. You picture six-figure checks, luxury trailers, private catering, the whole 9 yards. But the reality of how television paychecks actually work, especially for supporting cast members on cable dramas, would make your jaw hit the floor if you saw the actual deposit hitting their bank accounts. Here is how the math really breaks down, and I promise you it is uglier than anything you have ever imagined. Let us say a supporting actor on a major cable drama earns somewhere in the range of $20,000 to $40,000 per episode. That number sounds enormous to the average person, and on paper it absolutely is. But now start peeling back the layers. First, your agent takes 10% off the top. Then your manager takes another 10 to 15%. Then your lawyer takes 5%. Then the Screen Actors Guild takes its dues. Then the federal government takes its cut, which for a single earner in California can easily exceed 30%. Then the state of Montana wants its share because that is where the income was technically generated. Then you factor in the fact that a typical cable season might only produce 8 to 10 episodes, meaning your annual gross income from the show is far lower than the per-episode number suggests. By the time all of those hands have reached into your pocket and taken their slice, that flashy per-episode figure has been gutted down to a fraction of what fans assume you are actually taking home. And that is before you even account for the hidden costs that the production does not cover. Jefferson White was living a bizarre, almost surreal double life during the peak of Yellowstone's cultural dominance. On the street, fans were stopping him for selfies, asking for autographs, telling him that Jimmy Hurdstrom was their favorite character on the entire show. Social media was exploding with fan edits, tribute videos, and passionate debates about his storyline. He was, by every visible metric, a breakout star. But behind closed doors, there were moments when his credit card was being declined at the grocery store checkout. There were nights when he sat in his temporary Montana rental staring at his banking app, watching the balance tick dangerously close to zero, wondering how he was supposed to survive the inevitable months-long hiatus between seasons when the checks completely stopped arriving. The hiatus is the silent killer of working actors, and it is the part of the industry that fans almost never think about. When Yellowstone wrapped a season, Jefferson did not immediately jump into another high-paying gig. The industry does not work that way for character actors, no matter how beloved their roles might be. He was stuck in a holding pattern, contractually tethered to the show but not actively earning from it, burning through whatever savings he had managed to scrape together during the filming months. And then, just when he thought he had finally stabilized his finances and built up a modest cushion to survive the next gap, the production dropped a bomb that sent shockwaves through the entire cast. An unexpected, massive production delay hit Yellowstone, pushing the start of the next filming block back by months, longer than anyone had anticipated. For Jefferson White, that delay was not just an inconvenience. It was a financial catastrophe. The cushion he had carefully built evaporated almost overnight, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in a way that felt terrifyingly familiar. He had been here before, back in the pre-Yellowstone days of empty bank accounts and desperate side hustles, and the thought of sliding backward into that nightmare was almost more than he could bear. But the delay was not the worst part, because buried inside the chaos of that production shutdown was a seismic creative decision that would uproot Jimmy Hurdstrom from the only world he had ever known and send him thousands of miles away from the Dutton Ranch into completely uncharted territory. A move that would either save Jefferson White's career or quietly erase him from the franchise forever. When Season 4 of Yellowstone rolled around, viewers watched in shock as John Dutton delivered a crushing ultimatum to Jimmy Hurdstrom. After another devastating rodeo injury, Jimmy was being packed up and shipped off to the legendary 6666 Ranch in Guthrie, Texas. On screen, it was framed as tough love, a last-ditch effort to turn a broken boy into a real, seasoned cowboy. But behind the camera, when Jefferson White first read those script pages, a cold wave of dread washed over him. Because anyone who has worked in television long enough knows the unspoken rule. When your character gets put in the back of a truck and driven off the main set, it usually means one of two things. You are either getting a high-stakes spin-off, or you are being quietly, politely written out of the show entirely. And for months, Jefferson White genuinely did not know which one it was. Think about the psychological torture of that situation. Yellowstone had become the biggest cultural juggernaut in modern television, drawing over 10 million live viewers every single week. It was the flagship of the Paramount Network, a multi-billion-dollar empire, and Jefferson was being pulled away from the main cast, away from the familiar Montana mountains, away from the safety of the Dutton Ranch ensemble. He was being dropped into the middle of King County, Texas, a desolate, wind-scoured expanse of red dirt, mesquite trees, and rattlesnakes where the nearest town has a population of less than 200 people. The 4-6s wasn't a cozy studio backlit. It was a real, historic, 260,000-acre working cattle ranch where the cowboys didn't care about Hollywood scripts, didn't care about celebrity culture, and had zero patience for actors who couldn't pull their own weight. Filming out in West Texas pushed Jefferson's physical and mental resilience to the absolute edge. The heat was suffocating, hovering above 100 degrees for weeks at a time. The isolation was suffocating in a completely different way. Surrounded by endless dirt roads and vast, empty horizons, Jefferson spent his downtime trapped in his own head, wondering what was going to happen to his career. The rumors of a Star 6666 star spinoff were swirling across entertainment blogs, but in the volatile world of prestige TV development, spinoffs get announced, delayed, rewritten, and scrapped every single week. Nothing was guaranteed. If the Texas storyline didn't connect with the audience, or if the network decided to pivot in a different creative direction, Jefferson White was looking down the barrel of unemployment once again. And with his bank account still fragile from the previous production hiatus, he knew he couldn't survive another extended dry spell. It was during those long, lonely Texas nights, sitting in the absolute quiet of the 4-6s, surrounded by the dust and the heat, that something fundamentally shifted inside Jefferson White. He looked at the harsh, uncompromising reality of the entertainment industry and realized a terrifying truth. Being just an actor was a trap. As long as he was solely reliant on casting directors to choose him, writers to give him lines, and network executives to greenlight his episodes, His financial destiny was completely out of his hands. He was riding an emotional and financial roller coaster that could crash at any moment, and he refused to let someone else hold the steering wheel anymore. Instead of sitting in his trailer between takes waiting for the world to decide his fate, Jefferson started doing something unexpected. He picked up a camera. He began documenting the raw, unvarnished reality of ranch life with his own lens, capturing the texture and truth of the American West from an insider's perspective. He started studying the technical mechanics of production, observing how directors framed shots, how sound was mixed, and how narratives were crafted from the other side of the monitor. He began actively pitching himself not just as talent, but as a creator, a voice, and a multi-platform storyteller. That quiet, desperate pivot in the Texas dust would prove to be the most important turning point of his entire life. Because what started as a survival mechanism on a remote ranch was about to morph into an entirely new media empire of his own making. One that would finally give him the financial freedom he had been chasing for over a decade. Yet, just as his bold reinvention began to take shape, the entire entertainment industry was suddenly hit by an unprecedented earthquake that threatened to tear down everything he had just begun to build. When Jefferson White returned from the Texas dust, he was no longer just Jimmy Hurdstrom, the actor hoping for lines in the next script. He was a man with a completely reimagined survival blueprint. He had looked into the abyss of financial uncertainty one too many times, and he made a definitive, non-negotiable vow to himself. He would never again allow his bank account to depend on whether another person decided to put him in front of a camera. If the entertainment industry was going to treat working actors like disposable commodities, Jefferson was going to build an ecosystem where he held the leverage, owned the content, and diversified his income across so many different pillars that no single cancellation, hiatus, or contract dispute could ever threaten his livelihood again. The first major breakthrough in this master plan arrived from an unexpected angle: Paramount's burgeoning multimedia division. When the network decided to launch the official Yellowstone podcast, a flagship audio series designed to give millions of die-hard fans an unprecedented behind-the-scenes look at the show's creation, they needed a host who possessed rare dual qualities. They needed someone with intimate, authentic insider knowledge of the production, but also someone whose natural charisma, curiosity, and emotional intelligence could draw out genuine, vulnerable stories from massive stars like Kevin Costner, Kelly Riley, and Cole Hauser. Jefferson White was the obvious, undisputed choice. Stepping into the host chair of the official podcast was a masterstroke of career strategy. For the first time in his professional life, Jefferson had a reliable, consistent media contract that operated entirely outside the unpredictable episodic shooting schedule of the main series. Week after week, he wasn't just interviewing his co-stars. He was actively positioning himself as the official voice, cultural ambassador, and creative bridge between the multi-billion-dollar franchise and its tens of millions of fans worldwide. It provided a steady, predictable baseline of income that shielded him from the volatile feast-or-famine cycles of acting, giving him the breathing room he had spent a decade desperately clawing for. But he didn't stop at podcasting. Jefferson took the photography skills he had honed during those solitary, sweltering weeks at the Four Sixes and turned them into a high-demand creative enterprise. His raw, black-and-white, medium-format film portraits of authentic Western ranch hands, stunt coordinators, and fellow actors on set captured the visceral soul of Yellowstone better than any glossy studio marketing shoot ever could. Major publications took notice. Gallery exhibits followed. His visual art became a recognized, respected brand in its own right, generating direct revenue and expanding his artistic identity far beyond the confines of Jimmy Hurdstrom's denim jacket and neck brace. At the same time, Jefferson began expanding his on-screen footprint aggressively. Instead of sitting around waiting for Yellowstone cameras to roll, he booked compelling guest arcs on hit network procedurals like Chicago P.D., landed roles in prestigious indie dramas like Eileen alongside Anne Hathaway, and secured a pivotal part in Alex Garland's blockbuster theatrical thriller Civil War, followed by a high-profile role in Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. By branching out into major studio tentpoles and prestigious indie cinema, he built multiple independent income streams that guaranteed he was no longer financially chained to a single television network. He was finally doing it. By early 2023, Jefferson White had constructed a resilient, multi-hyphenate creative fortress from the dirt up. He was an actor, a host, a photographer, and an emerging director with genuine financial stability and creative autonomy. And then, just as the foundation was finally set, an unprecedented catastrophe struck the entire entertainment landscape. In the summer of 2023, Hollywood suffered a total, historic shutdown as the Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA went on strike simultaneously for the first time in over 6 decades. Every studio set went dark. Every production froze. Simultaneously, the chaotic behind-the-scenes explosion between Kevin Costner and Paramount erupted across global headlines, bringing the flagship Yellowstone production to a screeching, chaotic halt. For thousands of working actors across the globe, this prolonged freeze was an existential nightmare that wiped out savings accounts and ended careers overnight. Years earlier, a sudden industry shutdown of this magnitude would have completely destroyed Jefferson White, leaving him broken, broke, and stranded. But this time, when the dust settled over a paralyzed Hollywood, the world looked at Jefferson White and realized something extraordinary. He wasn't just surviving the storm, he was standing taller than ever before. If you want to see the definition of resilience, look at Jefferson White today. Because when you hold up a mirror between the fictional journey of Jimmy Hurdstrom and the real-world survival story of the man who played him, the parallels are almost chilling. Think about it. When Jimmy Hurdstrom first arrived at the Dutton Ranch in Season 1, he was an aimless, broken kid with criminal ties, zero direction, and absolutely nothing to his name. He was branded, thrown off bucking horses, told he was useless, and forced to rebuild himself from the gravel up through sheer grit and stubborn determination. He had to be exiled to the dusty expanse of Texas, stripped of his comfort zone, and tested by real cowboys before he could finally stand on his own 2 feet as a grown man with a future. Jefferson White lived that exact same narrative, not just on the television screen, but in his real, everyday life. Today, Jefferson is no longer the terrified Midwestern kid, staring at a bank balance in the single digits, wondering if he can afford to stay in the business. He is a certified Hollywood success story who conquered the system by refusing to play by its outdated, predatory rules. At 35 years old, he has achieved what only a tiny fraction of working actors ever manage: true creative and financial sovereignty. His net worth has firmly crossed into comfortable, multimillion-dollar territory, bolstered not by a single lucky TV contract, but by a diversified fortress of podcast hosting deals, major studio blockbuster appearances, high-end fine art photography sales, and independent producing projects. His personal life is just as anchored. While Jimmy found stability and genuine love with Emily in the dust of the 4 Sixes, Jefferson built an unshakable foundation with his real-life wife, actress and social worker Casey Wertman. Together, they have forged a grounded, private life far away from the shallow, performative noise of Hollywood red carpets, proving that you don't have to lose your soul or your shirt to thrive in the modern entertainment machine. When Yellowstone fans tuned into the final, earth-shaking chapter of the flagship series, the sight of Jimmy Hurdstrom was no longer that of a tragic punchline. He returned to our screens as a calm, confident, self-assured cowboy, a survivor who had taken the worst beating the world could throw at him and came out on the other side completely unbroken. And every single flicker of that hard-won maturity in Jimmy's eyes was real, because Jefferson White had to bleed in the dirt to earn it. The kid from Iowa who had to lie about riding a horse just to get a foot in the door didn't just survive the cutthroat meat grinder of prestige television. He mastered it. He took the empty bank accounts, the shattered bones, the agonizing hiatuses, and the threat of cancellation, and he used them as raw fuel to build an empire of his own. Jimmy Hurdstrom lost everything before he became a real cowboy. Jefferson White lost all his money before he became a real mogul. And as the sun finally sets on the Dutton Ranch, one thing is undeniably clear. No matter what the future holds for the 4 Sixes or the next chapter of the Sheridan universe, Jefferson White isn't taking orders from anyone ever again. He built his own ranch on his own terms, from the dirt all the way to the sky. While Jefferson White successfully clawed his way back from the edge of financial collapse, a secretive development behind the scenes of the upcoming 6666 spinoff has placed his entire future in the Taylor Sheridan universe on the line. leaving fans to wonder if his greatest career gamble is about to pay off or cost him everything he fought to build.